All right, so let's welcome back to the podcast, past podcast guest and multi-time podcast guest, Ryan Scheckel from Texas Tech University. Usually we're doing a yearly interview, but Ryan's not on for that this time. Ryan, first, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks for having me again.
So I hear there's an art exhibition happening at the NACADA Annual Conference in Portland. Is that true?
Yeah, so it's been a project that's been in the works for a long time, and like a lot of artwork, it's something that starts as an idea, sometimes often, very vague and unformed, and then you get through the process, and you can think about realities like media and approach or whatever the medium might be that you'll eventually express it in the world. Um, and and this was something that nearly happened, as far as I understand. It was a possibility that was presented for the San Juan annual conference that didn't happen because of COVID. But this has been something that's been part of the community of advisors that I've known, that I've met, and some that I haven't, for a while now. And we've finally found a perfect opportunity. A city like Portland, after all of the stuff everyone's been through during the pandemic, the uncertainties and the disruptions, but especially a chance to, really open things up, and think differently about what we do. And so that's where this really started to land as a possibility, is that we were looking at a real chance to see it realized.
Yeah, so this is something that has never been done before at any annual conference for NACADA, right?
Yeah, or maybe any other. I haven't been to a lot of other conferences, especially higher ed conferences. I know that, of course, there are higher ed conferences for the arts, but outside of those, I'm not sure. But one thing I do know is that there are creative types, artists, folks who do a lot of things that have real um, creative and philosophical and typically traditional art expressions in all kinds of communities. All right. We often think of ourselves as an advising community, and certainly that's our primary identity, but we're more complex than that. And we have folks who've been involved in all sorts of creative activities. It wasn't too long ago that there was a choir at the annual conference for NACADA. And so we express ourselves in a lot of different ways. And this is just one of those.
Yeah, and so it's called an art exhibition, but I think some people might also hear art exhibit. Are those the same thing? Are they different?
Well, I think it's a little bit of semantics, and for those who know me, boy, can I get bogged down in that. But usually an exhibit is something that's a little bit more permanent, where an exhibition is a little bit more experiential. It's a little bit less. I don't know. It's a little bit less in line with like the long-term museum type of displays of art. And so an exhibit is usually something that lasts longer, where an exhibition is usually a short term. And certainly, the feel of an annual conference is that short term experience that makes a lasting difference in our lives and in our practice. And the same thing is true of exhibitions. And so we've chosen that framework because it won't be long term. But the convention center, the Oregon Convention Center, has an exhibit of public artwork that's more long term, and that's a little differentiation there in the language anyway. And in my experience, having been an advisor in our School of Art for 9 years, is that exhibitions come and go, and this is just part of the ongoing conversation.
Yeah, and so you were mentioning that this was a discussion that happened a couple years ago. It was something that might have happened at the Puerto Rico conference. Was it really close to actually coming to fruition at that conference?
Well, close, is it's another subjective term. I think when a formal proposal is drafted and presented to the annual conference advisory board, that's a really formal step. Most of what I was involved in was very informal. Conversations at annual conferences in the evenings, maybe offsite, with people who are like-minded, is an important part. But it's the same thing if you think about the scholarship of advising. A lot of times we have questions, we have interests, lines of inquiry that pop up from our daily lives, our daily practice, or something, that an idea that we ran across. And someone goes, oh, that'd be great for a conference proposal, or a presentation, or be a wonderful poster session, or maybe an article. Like, getting to that formal process, there's some work there. And certainly I benefited from the work of others, just like anyone who's involved in the scholarship of advising or any other kind of scholarly activity would benefits from others. And I did a bit of literature review, looking over that past proposal, and there wasn't a lot to edit out of it. There wasn't a lot of change. But the justification, I think, comes from the community, folks who do advising work, who are part of NACADA, but are also creators.
Yeah, but kind of going off of that, I mean, you might have people that are like, "Come on, Ryan, should we really have something like that at the annual conference? Does it really make sense?" How do you convince people like that?
Well, I mean, again, I think about advisors. I've been an advisor, or been in advising for going on 20 years. Had the benefit of being an advising administrator for the last 6, and getting to think about the range of people I've met just in my own work, just on my own campus. There are times when I think advisors, when they look at what's presented to them in the association or in the scholarship of advising, they don't see an on ramp for them. And it may be because of how long they've been doing it. It may be a little bit of imposter syndrome. It may be they just, haven't found the right person to have a conversation with yet. But it also might be because they haven't been presented with a new way of thinking about the work that they do. The time that I spent in our School of Art, I heard a lot, especially in higher education, about how the arts can be misunderstood or undervalued in the traditional publish or perish kind of mindset, that research with a capital R, the only kind of scholarly activity that generates funding. Those are the things that are legitimized and valued. And not to say that those aren't important, valuable things for higher education, and for our world, but there's a lot of other ways that people come to understand themselves. On the website for the art exhibition, there's a reference to Clive Cazot's Art, Research, and Philosophy from 2017, where he builds on this idea that for years, inquiry regarding the relationship between scholarship, knowledge, and the arts really shows how art, especially that immediacy of a performance or of a painting or an experience, can interact powerfully with traditional structures of knowledge generation. And that's definitely something that we wanted to see happen with this art exhibition, is that we kind of have a traditional understood approach to what these conferences are like. And that traditional understood approach, while certainly continuing to evolve and include more perspectives than just, say, the social or hard sciences, including humanities and stuff, it wasn't a full picture. And I feel like this, while maybe not the norm, certainly, it starts to not only draw in people from all perspectives, but it also accentuates this idea that we can think differently. We can understand the world and the work that we do differently. And that there's value in that. Value alone in taking somebody else's perspective for a moment, looking at it through their eyes and through their work, and thinking, how does that inform and influence the way I think about myself and the work that we do with students and for our institutions, and ultimately as scholar practitioners. Art might be some of the best places where you see idea and action overlap the most.
Yeah, and it seems like every year at these annual conferences, there's always something that's added, something new. So this, I think, could be like the next thing, right? So if you have this at the Portland conference, I'm assuming it's sort of like a pilot of sorts, maybe something that continues on after Portland to the next conference in Orlando.
Well, we definitely had to think that way, right? It would be in some ways short-sighted to not think about what would this activity be like long term. Is this sustainable? Is there real interest there? This is all things that we're open to. I think the structure of a pilot oftentimes is underappreciated. We, as academic advisors, are usually at institutions of higher learning where we're exploring concepts and we're testing the waters on these theoretical notions, these suppositions, these hypotheses, maybe some assumptions, and we can test those, we can problematize those, we can evaluate. Is this really something that lasts? Now, a lot of my experience with sort of the theory that we're testing here is anecdotal and personal, and this is an opportunity to test that, certainly. And if the response is what we're hoping for, and if the response is strong, then I think that there's an opportunity to consider longer term. What does this look like? I mean, we're going from a rich, vibrant, creative city like Portland this year to another very creative space next year. And I think that there's a lot of energy and interest around, um, expressing ourselves in a whole wide range of things that are not limited to what is expected or what's the norm.
Yeah, definitely. Now, if someone's listening and they're like, this sounds really interesting, maybe I want to submit something. How does one go about that?
Sure. So a call will be going out, or may have already gone out by the time you're listening to this, via email, from the executive office to NACADA members. But there's also a link from the annual conference website to a page that will have the submission form. Where artists who have ideas, rough sketches, or completed work, any stage of the process. For anyone who has ever submitted a proposal to an annual conference, you know that your presentation is sometimes, but not always, fully ready to go at the time of submission. So
Mhm.
we're open to some of these artworks still being in process at the time of submission. But the link will be there from the website, and then also will be included in the email that goes out. But again, you can contact me too, and I'd be happy to point anyone in the right direction. We'll not only be looking for people who submit artwork for consideration to be selected for this exhibition, but we'll also be looking for volunteers for this process, to be a part of it. I've been thrilled to be joined by 8 other folks on our annual conference art exhibition action group, as we're calling it. But I know that we'll need lots of help to see this through. Not just people who will walk through the doors and take in the artwork, not just people who will submit artwork to be viewed, but also people who will help us actually put the show up and staff it and make sure that there are folks there to answer questions.
Yeah. And so the types of artwork submissions, are we talking like paintings, sketches, sculptures, all of the above,
All
anything
of the
else?
above. Yeah, I've had the just the absolute joy to meet folks who create all kinds of artwork. From the traditional understood, ceramics and painting, to multimedia pieces, urban sketch artists. I know someone who knits and finds a great range of expression and possibility in that sort of textile and thread work artwork approach. And so we're open to anything that somebody thinks would be appropriate for the overall themes of the conference, the ideas behind academic advising. It doesn't have to be a painting of advising. It doesn't have to be a sketch from your campus. It doesn't have to be a photograph of something related specifically to a bridge, which is part of the conference theme structure. But something that does speak to how do you as an advisor think of yourself, think of your work, think of what it means to be a part of closing gaps and bridging people together, or even the themes of time, past, present, future. There's a lot to draw from in this conference theme. There's a lot to draw from in our lives as advisors, and I think those things will inform the work. And it could be any potential type of artwork that you feel is relevant, even design.
Yeah, and so you're mentioning the conference theme. So that one is building bridges, honoring our past, celebrating the present, and preparing for the future. And there's a little brief blurb on the annual conference website that kind of describes it a little bit. But like any theme, it's very broad. So
Sure.
I think anything advising wise probably can connect to that theme, right?
Yeah, definitely. And it's one of the things that I first thought about is almost every art exhibition has some sort of structural framework. It may just be the media type. It may be exclusively a photography exhibition, or it may be more philosophical or thematic in a conceptual sense. But usually they're very open ended, and that's one of the joys of artwork, and it's one of the joys of meeting artists and people who express themselves through creative works. Is they're great at finding those connections.
Yeah. And so if someone does submit, when's the deadline for them to get that in?
Well, we're going to keep this open for about 2 months, and so typically, if well, what we're expecting is if the call goes out around March 15th, that the deadline should be somewhere around the middle of May. May 15th, ideally. But again, I want to remind anyone who's thinking about it that may sound like I only have 2 months to do something, and maybe my process is more 3, 4 months projects. It doesn't have to be fully finished. right? It can be very rough at the time of submission. We'll have the full timeline on the call and on the website, but we're looking at something around August, September of being like our full on, are you ready to go? Is this going to be happening? But I do know that there are folks who are often working on conference presentation content, even a couple of days or weeks before the conference date. So, the finishing touches may be something that you're working on even up until September. The big part is we want to make sure that the folks who come have work that is engaging and interesting and complete. But we also want to make sure that we honor the expectation that people who are submitting artwork have done that work, and it isn't something that's unfinished.
Yeah, and I guess with expectations for the artist, like let's say they do get accepted for their art piece for the art exhibition, are they responsible for getting it to the conference uh, after the
Yeah,
conference is done?
we've thought a lot about that. This is the first time around. It's I think one of the best ways to think about it is it's a small gallery,
Mhm.
and small galleries are frequently, especially small local galleries, are usually working with people who are a lot closer. And we know we have folks who might be interested from all around the world, but given the logistics and the sort of pilot nature of testing these waters, we decided that it's going to be the responsibility of the artist to get the artwork there. And there's a lot of ways that that can happen, and definitely I'm open to discussing those with folks. If there's any concern whatsoever about I don't know how I will get my work there, let's talk about it. We have time to sort through that and to make the best decision. But there's going to be some expectation that we probably can't mount a painting that's 6 foot by 8 foot in the space that we're going to be given. We probably can't do a sculpture that's life sized of a person. And so if you're working in large scale or if you're working in very difficult to transport materials or whatever, that may be a bit of an issue. But the responsibility will be of the artist to get it there in some way, shape, or form. And we have some flexibility on that, though.
Yeah, and let's say I'm an attendee and I'm at the art exhibition and I really like a piece of art. It connects with me. It's engaging. Is there an opportunity for attendees to purchase something, or is it just there just to view?
Well, every artist will have the opportunity to decide if they want to donate their artwork to a silent auction to benefit the NACADA scholarships structure for events and annual conferences and so on. So an artist may choose to do that when they submit their artwork. But if an artist wants to take a different approach, any further sales would be between the artist and their interested parties. But we're really encouraged by the generosity of folks in the advising community, and we expect that some, if not all, of the artwork will be available for silent auction.
Yeah. And I've talked about like the importance and how this really connects to advising. But I guess for you personally, like this is something you're taking on. This is a pilot that hopefully continues on after this. Why is it important for you to try to make this happen?
Well, ultimately, I know how conversations happen around artwork.
Mhm.
Not just the conversations I've had talking to people who create artwork who also do advising, um, but being in gallery spaces, it just I don't know. It puts you in a different place, and there are times that I think back to some of my first annual conferences, some of my first ever engagement, and it was overwhelming at times, to sit in a presentation from somebody who does just a fantastic job of representing their ideas, maybe the models or the work that they're doing, or, an important concept in the field, and to feel like I'm not there. Like that's not who I am, and I don't know if you want to call it imposter syndrome or whatever, but there can be moments of personal disengagement because either the ideas are big or the distance seems too great or whatever. And just to have a space that openly invites you to think differently, to sort of break those molds. One of my favorite quotes about art comes from Alain de Botton's The Pleasures and Sorrows of Work. And he says, we might define art as anything which pushes our thoughts in important yet neglected directions. And I'm like, from that perspective, then advising is a work of art, and conference sessions are their own kind of exhibition, right? When I submit a proposal to talk about Star Wars and advising theory, am I not creating something that pushes people's minds in neglected yet important directions? To me, philosophically, I feel like art is just another way for advisors to express themselves. And that type of expression is another way for other advisors to think differently about the work that they do. But I do know that it's going to be so radically different than what we're traditionally presented that there's going to be some fantastic conversations. And that's really what I look forward to the most, is just thinking differently and talking differently about advising and advisors and the students we advise and the places we do that work.
Yeah, so it'll be, where's Ryan? Oh, he's at the art exhibition area. Go check him out there. He'll be there the entire conference.
Just a little bit, maybe.
Yeah. Now, if anyone has any questions, I mean, I know it'll be on the conference website, so we'll include the link in the show notes. But if someone wants to reach out to you because they have further questions, how can they do that?
Yeah, I think the easiest way is just to email me at ryan.scheckel@ttu, Texas Tech University.edu, or hit me up on Twitter. That's at RDSCHECKEL, RD Scheckel. I'm on Twitter all the time. I'd be happy to chat about any of these ideas, especially if you're thinking about submitting, or if you're interested in volunteering. But even if you're like, I just want to talk more about this art idea, or any other ideas that you might have. I think that's another thing that's more personally about me, is I value so much the ideas and what they represent, the potential and what they can become. And getting to this point where we're actually talking about an art exhibition is really thrilling, because while it may not last, it may not go on forever, and it may not be everybody's cup of tea, just to see an idea so far afield from what we're usually doing means that other ideas aren't that far afield anymore.
Yeah, and again, to be an observer to kind of see where it started and where it's at right now, to have this conversation and to be able to think where it's going to be in October. Super excited for this. And so I think an early congratulations to you on this and your team. And I look forward to attending and seeing all these pieces of art in October. Thanks, Ryan, for being on the podcast.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. We'll see you in October.